It's just another ordinary walk until it isn't. The light catches something at your feet, a metal glint on the pavement, smooth and unfamiliar. You pause, glance around. No one else seems to notice it. You reach down. Maybe it's a coin. Maybe it's a stone, worn down to perfect symmetry by time and motion. Maybe it's a ring that seems too deliberate to be truly lost. Whatever it is, it doesn't feel random. It feels like it found you, and something deep in your chest stirs. Curiosity, recognition, maybe even meaning. We live in a world obsessed with what's loud, fast, and big. But some of the most powerful signals arrive quietly. A forgotten item on a park bench, a flower blooming in the wrong season, an old key in the middle of a sidewalk. Most people overlook them, brush past, never giving a second thought. But those who pay attention, those who pause long enough to ask the right questions, often find themselves guided in ways logic can't always explain. At New Day Mindfulness, we believe that the universe doesn't shout, it whispers. And today's video is about learning to hear those whispers through the lens of ancient spatial wisdom, what modern Feng Shui calls symbolic alignment. This isn't about superstition or magical thinking. It's about energetic pattern recognition. Centuries of observation that suggest certain items, when discovered at just the right time, act as silent mirrors for what's unfolding in your life. They don't control your destiny, but they reflect your readiness. And sometimes they point toward change you didn't even know you were stepping into. Today we're going to explore 6 ordinary things, simple objects you might find by chance on the street, on a sidewalk, in a parking lot, that might not be so ordinary at all. Based on traditional energy interpretation, real-world application, and grounded personal insight, each of these carries a unique message depending on where, when, and how you find it. And more importantly, how you feel the moment you pick it up. Throughout this episode, we won't be predicting the future or telling you what to believe. Instead, we'll share how small, symbolic encounters, when noticed with the right awareness, can align with deeper shifts in your personal energy. You'll hear real examples. You'll learn what each object is traditionally said to represent. And you'll understand how to interpret what these unexpected encounters might mean for your finances, focus, relationships, and personal growth, if you're paying attention. But before we dive in, let me ask something simple of you, not with pressure, but with gratitude. If you value content that invites you to slow down, see deeper, and notice what others miss, please take a second to tap like. Share this video with someone who's on their own path of transformation, and hit that subscribe button. We're close to reaching our first 2,000 followers here on New Day Mindfulness, and with your support, we'll continue bringing you meaningful, practical, and beautifully crafted insights rooted in the wisdom traditions that still speak, if you're willing to listen. So, are you ready to see the world differently today? Let's begin with the first object. It's the one you're most likely to overlook, yet it might hold the code to your next financial shift. You've seen it before, maybe a stray bill, lying face down, edges worn, with a curious set of numbers printed across its surface. Most people spend it without thinking. But in the world of energy, some bills aren't for spending. They're for remembering. They're for anchoring. And they might just be trying to tell you, abundance is closer than you think. Section 1. Small money with strange markings or serials. In the modern world, where digital transactions dominate and physical cash is slowly fading from everyday use, finding a stray dollar bill or any small currency note feels more and more like an anomaly. But on the rare occasion you do encounter one on the sidewalk, under a seat, or resting near the corner of a bus stop bench, there is something about it that invites curiosity. Some people walk by without a second glance. Others pick it up, smile at their small luck, and move on. But those who look closer might notice something strange. A sequence of numbers on the bill that feels oddly personal, strangely patterned, or even eerily symbolic. This is where energy observation begins. In Feng Shui and energetic numerology, every number carries a frequency, not just metaphorically, but as a vibration that interacts with your subconscious state. Numbers, when appearing at transitional or emotionally heightened moments, can reflect what your system is calling in or resisting. A bill marked with 88888 is not the same as one with 042701. One is loaded with a historical association with wealth and repetition of fortune. The other, while neutral, may carry no intentional meaning. But that's where context and resonance come in. Let's step back for a moment. If someone finds a dollar bill with the sequence 168888 in the middle of a personal financial dilemma, say they're thinking about quitting a job or starting a business, that moment of discovery becomes more than chance. It becomes pattern meeting awareness. In Chinese numerology, 168 means the road to prosperity, while 880 is one of the most universally auspicious sequences, often tied to continual wealth. In Vietnamese cultural belief, Batam, triple eights, is a symbol of never-ending fortune. In Western settings, people speak of angel numbers, often describing sequences like 111, 333, or 555 as personal signs. But beyond cultural interpretation, what really matters is internal recognition. If a number speaks to you in that moment, it is significant. That bill becomes more than money. It becomes a mirror, a quiet nudge, a placeholder of intention. From an energetic design perspective, physical money carries yang energy. It is active, mobile, fluid. It's used to acquire, expand, distribute, and shift resources. That's why, when found unexpectedly, small denominations, especially those marked with distinctive serial patterns, are interpreted not just as lucky, but as communicative. They represent not just arrival of energy, but direction. If the number pattern feels expansive, ascending digits like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, it suggests momentum, upward flow, clarity of movement. If the pattern is mirrored to like 4224 or 1771, it could symbolize reflection, revisitation of cycles, or an opportunity to close a loop. If the pattern repeats like 555 or 6666, it might be amplifying the current energy you're radiating, creativity, balance, abundance, depending on the number. This is not magic. This is mathematics intersecting with mindfulness. Numbers appear in everything, but when you encounter a specific set during a specific thought in a specific environment, these variables add weight to their meaning. Think of it like this. The universe doesn't communicate in words. It communicates in patterns. And numbers are some of the most universal patterns available. They show up in license plates when you're deep in thought, on clocks when you wake suddenly, on receipts tied to purchases you made in hesitation or hope. But when they show up on found money, untouched, unrequested, and potentially meaningless to everyone else, that's when you should pay attention. Let's now explore how to respond practically. If you find a bill, be it a dollar, a coin, or a small note, and it feels significant, don't spend it, not right away. Keep it as a living reminder. Fold it neatly. Place it in a part of your wallet that holds symbolic value, not just next to receipts or forgotten gift cards. If you work with an altar or a reflection space, you may place it there with respect. You can even write a small note of what you were thinking or feeling when you found it, so you remember the moment later. These small acts take it from a passive discovery to an active, energetic tool. Many who practice this kind of spatial alignment keep such bills in their workspaces, near where they make financial decisions, on a vision board, near a safe, or in the drawer of a home office. They don't treat it as superstition. They treat it as an environmental anchor, a small object that reminds them of readiness, alignment, or confirmation. It's important, however, to understand context. Not all found money is positive. Just as space holds charge, so does placement. If a bill is found in an obviously polluted area, a sewer, a public restroom floor, inside a trash can, that energy is not clean. In Feng Shui terms, the location carries stagnant or decaying qi. And what looks like a financial blessing may actually be a symbolic warning, a leak, a misplaced opportunity, or even a drain on resources. In such cases, if the number still feels striking, take the moment as a message, not a keepsake. You don't have to carry the object home. You can receive the insight, thank the space, and walk away. That discernment is key. Let's take a real-world example. A creative professional, let's call her Amanda, found a crumpled $2 bill outside a public library while exiting a failed pitch meeting. Her instinct was to leave it. It was on a damp patch of concrete, but something told her to look closer. The number? Sfadu. The 777s caught her eye. She'd been seeing that number for weeks. She took the bill, dried it, and placed it on the inside cover of her sketchbook. Within a month, she'd received an unexpected freelance offer that led to a permanent contract. Was it the bill? No, but was it the shift in mindset, the reminder that even in a moment of rejection, energy was still circulating? Absolutely. That's how symbolic reinforcement works. It changes posture, and posture changes possibility. There are also cautionary examples. A man named Dan found $10 near the entrance of a nightclub after a rough night out. The cereal included Gursix. He laughed, joked with friends, and spent it within an hour. What followed was a 10-day streak of mechanical failures, delayed contracts, and lost keys. Could it be coincidence? Of course, but Dan later admitted that finding that money made him feel uneasy. He ignored the discomfort. He spent the energy without reflection. And in energetic terms, that's like inviting something into your field without checking its credentials. The lesson: don't ignore how something feels just because it looks like free money. From a Buddhist-informed view, attachment to external signs can create dependency, but awareness of symbols as reflections of your internal state is entirely different. We're not collecting tokens, we're cultivating presence. And when something as neutral as a dollar bill catches your intuition, you're not indulging in fantasy, you're listening to yourself, to the moment, to the invisible patterns that surround all of us. Ultimately, money is more than currency. It is one of the most emotionally charged and symbolically weighted items in human history. It causes wars, builds dreams, tears families apart, and brings strangers together. When it appears in your path, unrequested and unexplained, it deserves a moment of thought. If it's just money, treat it as money. But if it speaks to something inside you, if the number on it feels like timing, alignment, or personal encouragement, treat it as an echo of your own internal shift. And whether you keep it or not, let the moment mark something, that your awareness is rising, that your eyes are now tuned to detail, that even the smallest objects can carry a message when the observer is ready to receive. Section 2, natural stone or mineral that stands out. In the realm of environmental awareness and energetic sensitivity, one of the most underestimated yet profoundly anchoring objects you may encounter during a casual walk is a stone, a naturally occurring, unpolished piece of the earth that calls your attention not with shine or sparkle, but through presence, symmetry, or sensation. Stones as elemental earth energy in Feng Shui are not just pieces of matter, but embodiments of stillness, durability, and psychological grounding. Unlike fleeting signs such as paper currency or man-made tokens, a stone carries the weight of geological time. It has been shaped by pressure, patience, and countless cycles of weather, water, and energy. When you find a stone on the ground that feels different, maybe its surface is smoother than expected, or its color is rich and saturated in a way that stands out from its surroundings, or perhaps it simply seems to glow subtly in a moment where you weren't looking for anything. It deserves attention. In energetic terms, earth elements offer what fire, metal, wood, and water cannot: centering. This makes the finding of a stone especially significant during times when your life feels unstable, when your thoughts loop without direction, or when decisions seem impossible to make. It is not uncommon for people navigating career shifts, personal loss, burnout, or emotional overwhelm to report finding and unconsciously pocketing small stones during walks, hikes, or even city strolls. The timing is rarely coincidental. The earth element is drawn toward energy that needs recalibration. In moments of mental scatter or emotional overextension, the universe does not always send loud answers, but it might send a subtle weight, a signal that says, "Come back to your feet." Stones do not lift you, they hold you. Consider the example of Steve Jobs, who, during some of the most turbulent years of his career at Apple, reportedly took long barefoot walks in nature, not just for brainstorming, but for grounding. During one particular period of internal conflict and external criticism, it's said that he began carrying a small, unpolished stone in his pocket, not as a superstition or a fashion statement, but as a sensory anchor. The weight and texture of that stone reminded him of constancy. When the media shifted, when product launches were delayed, when personal tensions boiled over, the stone remained what it was: unchanged, silent, and intact. It became a quiet tool to return his attention to the present moment, something you can also cultivate. In practical terms, when you find a stone that feels energetically right, you are not just picking up a rock. You're entering into an unconscious dialogue with the energy of grounding. And grounding is not passive, it is stabilizing. It restores order where there has been mental clutter. It builds trust in your own decision-making where there has been doubt. It slows reactive tendencies and restores thoughtful pacing. This is why people who keep grounding stones at their workstations often report fewer impulsive purchases, more clarity during difficult conversations, and greater resilience when facing unexpected obstacles. The texture and weight of a stone offer important clues. If it feels warm to the touch, even in cool weather, it may be resonating with your personal field. If it feels cool but reassuring, that too is a good sign. But if the stone feels oddly sharp, leaves an oily residue, or triggers a sense of discomfort when held, it is likely not for you. Not all energy is meant to be absorbed. In some cases, stones have been resting in spaces with stagnant or discordant energy, trash-laden trails, polluted lots, or conflict-heavy zones. In such cases, the stone may act more as a reflective shield than an inviting talisman. Respect the signal your body gives you. If it relaxes upon touch, the stone is likely compatible. If it tenses, release it. There is no harm in walking away from something that isn't yours energetically. If the stone feels right, it should be cleaned before being brought fully into your space. Traditional cleansing methods include soaking it in salt water for 24 hours, rinsing under running spring or tap water, and exposing it to early morning sunlight. Not the harsh midday sun, but the soft golden rays of dawn that signify renewal. If preferred, gentle smoke from sandalwood or sage incense can also be used to clear residual energy. Once cleansed, the placement of the stone matters. In a home setting, earth energy is most beneficial in the center of the home, the northeast for knowledge and self-growth, and the southwest for relationships and grounding support. At work, placing a grounding stone in the far left corner of your desk, relative to where you sit, can enhance clarity and project stamina. For personal development, carrying the stone in your bag or pocket during interviews, long meetings, or public presentations can act as a discreet stabilizer for nervous system balance. These actions aren't about superstition, they're about sensory design. The brain associates weight with safety. The hand's contact with natural textures sends subtle cues to the nervous system that you are supported, you are safe, you are rooted. In chaotic environments, this tactile reassurance can be a game changer. In more symbolic terms, stones are reminders of non-reactivity. They do not jump, rush, or panic. They endure. And for anyone going through a transition, the wisdom of the earth element lies in its quiet power. Just as trees cannot grow without stable soil, your ideas, relationships, and income streams cannot flourish unless something in your life is reliably grounded. By aligning with the energy of stone, even in symbolic form, you reinforce that message. Growth begins where the ground is steady. It is also worth noting that not all stones are made equal in energetic influence. Obsidian, for example, is said to protect. Rose quartz softens, hematite grounds, jade replenishes. But the point isn't to search for meaning after you find the object. It is to observe what meaning arises when you hold it. In many ways, your reaction is the truest indicator of alignment. One person's healing stone may feel dull to another. That's because your energetic profile, shaped by personality, past experiences, current stressors, and future intent, is completely unique. So is your relationship with what you find. One final note: when the stone's role is complete, you will know. It may fall from your pocket unnoticed or feel finished somehow. In that case, return it to the earth. Do not throw it away. Release it respectfully into soil, near a plant, or at the base of a tree. Energetically speaking, this is a closing of the loop. It allows the energy to continue its cycle, and it allows you to receive the next signal more clearly, whatever form that may take. Section 3, random piece of jewelry, ring, earring, bracelet. In the field of environmental energy interpretation and symbolic awareness, few found objects evoke as much immediate curiosity or emotional charge as jewelry. Whether it's a single earring glinting from beneath a park bench, a bracelet curled against the curb near a shopping center, or a ring quietly resting on a sunlit sidewalk, the encounter always stops time for a moment. Unlike coins or stones, which often feel natural or transactional, jewelry, especially when discovered unexpectedly, carries an intimate weight. It was once worn, it once touched skin, and in doing so it absorbed emotional traces, subtle imprints of its previous owner's energy. In Feng Shui and other energy-based philosophies, metals act as conductors, not just of electricity, but of memory, sentiment, and intention. A ring or bracelet is more than an ornament. It is a symbolic loop, often representing cycles, vows, identities, and intentions that existed long before you found it. So when a piece of jewelry appears in your path, especially during a season of personal uncertainty, a career shift, the end of a relationship, an internal identity crisis, it may represent more than lost property. It may symbolize energetic handover. And that's why it deserves to be handled with precision, not impulse or peace. If you feel drawn to the object, not out of greed or curiosity, but out of a strange sense of recognition, that's your first clue that this item is carrying more than metal and design. That sensation of familiarity, of unexpected comfort, is often the result of energetic resonance. In such moments, your subconscious may be sensing the object's frequency, the trace patterns it holds, in its alignment with what your system is currently needing or releasing. It may show up as you're debating a major move. It may catch your eye when you're in quiet reflection about who you are becoming. If this happens, resist the urge to treat it as a souvenir. Treat it as a signal that something is entering your field, support, protection, or perhaps the symbolic confirmation of a new chapter beginning. However, just as metals are powerful carriers of memory and symbolism, they can also carry energetic residue that is incompatible or even heavy. Jewelry lost at sites of spiritual reverence, temples, altars, graves, or shrines, should never be taken. In many cultures, such items are part of offerings, rituals, or sacred acts of closure. Interfering with them not only disrespects the space, but invites energy into your field that was never meant for you. Even jewelry found near hospitals or trauma-related locations should be approached with caution, not fear, but respectful discernment. If you do encounter a piece that seems unclaimed, context matters. Where did you find it? What were you thinking or feeling just moments before? Was the moment charged, calm, or emotionally neutral? Your emotional state during the encounter influences how the object interacts with your system. That's why it's critical to perform what I call an energetic check-in. Hold the item briefly. Ask yourself, not intellectually, but physically, how does it feel? Does your body soften? Do your shoulders relax? Does your breath deepen? Or do you feel tense, restless, or slightly disoriented? These signals are more accurate than any visual cue or mental story. Your nervous system is the first to detect whether the item is an energetic match or mismatch. If the item feels compatible, the next step is cleansing. Metal, especially gold, silver, copper, or stainless steel, responds well to elemental cleansing. Submerge the item in salt water for a few hours. This neutralizes foreign frequencies and resets the object's vibrational field. Follow the bath with 1-2 hours of gentle sunlight, ideally morning light between 7 and 10 a.m., which is considered energetically neutral and gently activating. Alternatively, if the item is delicate or set with stones, use incense smoke to clear it. Frankincense, sandalwood, or Vietnamese tram hung are especially effective. As you do this, avoid projecting any specific desire onto the object. Don't try to make it lucky. Simply release its past and welcome neutrality. After cleansing, place the item near your bed, desk, or personal altar, anywhere you spend intentional time reflecting, planning, or creating. This allows you to observe its energetic effect over a week. Do you feel calmer, more confident? Do you notice an unexpected sense of protection or alignment in your choices? If the answer is yes, the item is now a symbolic ally, not a talisman in the mystical sense, but a reminder of synchrony, of the subtle connection between readiness and response. Let's turn briefly to a powerful modern-day parallel. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most energetically attuned public figures of our time, once shared a story about a bracelet she found early in her career, left behind after a television segment. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't even particularly stylish, but something about it felt important. She later said it became a symbol of presence for her, something she wore when needing to anchor herself in high-pressure interviews or negotiations. Not because it had magical power, but because it represented alignment, the right moment, the right sign, the right energy. This is how symbolic objects function when respected. They reflect an energetic truth you were already approaching, but needed to see embodied. Still, not every piece is meant to stay with you. And just because something glimmers doesn't mean it belongs. Jewelry that feels energetically cold, overly sharp, or causes minor misfortunes, delayed meetings, sudden arguments, unexplained fatigue, should be released. Don't discard it carelessly. Wrap it in fabric and place it somewhere where nature can reclaim it. A riverbank, a forest edge, or even return to a lost and found. In doing so, you're not throwing away metal. You're completing an energy cycle that was never meant to remain open. That act in itself brings clarity. In energetic design, every object you accept into your space becomes part of your field. And jewelry, because it rests so close to the skin, amplifies that influence. This is why mindfulness isn't just a mental practice. It's spatial, it's tactile, it's relational. The items we wear, carry, or even stumble upon are never just things. They are invitations. Invitations to notice what's entering your life, what's leaving, and how your own energy is shifting in response. Section 4, branch or flower with perfect natural balance. Among the many silent signals that nature offers in moments of transition, few are as delicate or as deeply symbolic as the quiet appearance of a perfectly balanced branch or flower lying undisturbed on the ground. Unlike manufactured objects, which carry the intention of human hands, these gifts of nature exist without agenda. They are shaped by time, weather, wind, and their own internal blueprint. And when they show up in your path during moments of contemplation or uncertainty, they can carry with them a subtle yet profound message. Something in your life is ready to begin again. In Feng Shui, the wood element governs growth, movement, creativity, and new beginnings. It's the element of spring, of youth, of self-expression, and potential. When you find a flower or branch that captures your attention, especially one that seems to stand out from its surroundings due to its symmetry, curve, color, or composition, it is not merely aesthetic, it is energetic. You are being invited to notice not just the object, but your own readiness to grow, adapt, or evolve. What makes these encounters meaningful isn't the item itself, it's the timing. That a flower would fall gently into your path on the same day you've made a difficult decision, or that a twisted but graceful branch would lie at your feet during a moment of emotional burnout, is not necessarily coincidence. Nature speaks in synchronicity, not language. And sometimes the most powerful messages arrive in silence. This idea is not confined to esoteric philosophy. It is culturally embedded in some of the most refined practices of Eastern thought. Take, for example, the Japanese tradition of ikebana, the contemplative art of flower arrangement. Unlike Western floral design, which emphasizes volume and color, ikebana focuses on space, balance, and the natural story of each element. A single curved branch, carefully placed to echo the arc of a human emotion, is seen as complete. A flower that leans but does not fall is understood as resilient. In ikebana, fallen branches are not dead. They are released. They become statements of impermanence and strength. Similarly, when you encounter a naturally elegant twig or a weathered blossom that rests without withering, you may be witnessing your own inner reflection, the part of you that has been pruned by life but still leans toward light. The discovery becomes symbolic alignment, an external mirror to an internal truth you may not have fully admitted yet. The power of this moment lies in interpretation. A flower that feels misplaced to one person might feel like a blessing to another, depending entirely on what life chapter they are navigating. That's why these items shouldn't be picked up mindlessly. They should be received, if at all, with awareness and care. If the energy of the object feels light, hopeful, or centering, it can be taken home, cleaned, and displayed. Not as decoration, but as a temporary ally for transition. Place it in a clean vase in a space where your mind is often active but calm. A reading nook, a writing desk, a meditation corner. Refresh the water daily if it's a flower, or gently dust if it's a dry branch. The object's role is not to last forever. Its purpose is to serve as a signal, a brief, energetic companion during a time of internal reset. Let's consider an example that blends design and awareness. Architect Frank Lloyd Wright was famous not only for his buildings, but for how deeply he integrated nature into the spaces he created. There is a story told by one of his apprentices that during a difficult creative block, Wright spent a day walking alone near his Wisconsin home. He returned with nothing but a slightly curved branch and placed it in a glass bottle on his drafting table. When asked what it was for, he replied, "That's the line I need." The branch stayed in his office for weeks and is said to have inspired the curvature of one of his later projects. This wasn't superstition, it was sensory observation. respect for the shapes and energies that arise naturally, and the humility to recognize when they resonate with our own trajectory. Cleansing and care for a found flower or branch is just as much about respect as it is about energy. When brought into your home, these items should be treated as guests, not as clutter. They should not be shoved into dusty corners or left to decay without attention. If you notice the flower beginning to wilt or the branch beginning to feel energetically dull, meaning you no longer feel the soft connection you did when you first picked it up, that's your cue. Return it to nature, not the trash. Take it outside, thank it mentally or quietly aloud for what it represented, and place it near a tree, in a garden, or by a stream if possible. This closing act completes the energy cycle. In Buddhist-influenced thought, returning to nature what belongs to nature is not just a custom, it's a form of gratitude, a reinforcement that what comes into your life does not need to be owned to be honored. There are also cases when you should leave the object where it is. If the flower is found in a place that feels emotionally heavy, such as near a hospital, cemetery, or site of visible damage, it may be carrying energy that belongs to a space, not to you. In such cases, observe with reverence but do not take. Let the object continue its role undisturbed. Your attention alone may be the acknowledgement it was meant to receive. Similarly, if the object feels too perfect, placed almost deliberately in a way that feels unnatural, it's worth questioning whether it's truly aligned with your path or whether it's a distraction dressed as a sign. Energy works subtly, not dramatically. If it feels forced, it probably is. Ultimately, flowers and branches are not about fortune or luck. They are about readiness. A flower in full bloom falling at your feet may be telling you that the time for dormancy is over. A branch that twists but does not break may be whispering that your flexibility is your strength. The way you interpret these messages is less about belief and more about observation. Observation is the first step in transforming your environment, not by changing what's around you, but by seeing it with more presence. If you begin to integrate this awareness into your life, you'll find that the world starts to feel more communicative. You'll notice patterns in nature not as decoration, but as signals. You'll stop scrolling past moments of synchronicity, and you'll realize that you're not waiting for your life to start. You're already walking through the messages that lead you toward it. Section 5, small figurine or symbolic object. There is a particular kind of stillness that occurs when you notice a small figure resting in an unexpected place. A turtle figurine lying next to a tree stump, a ceramic frog nestled between sidewalk cracks, a miniature elephant hidden among stones at the edge of a park, or even a barely noticeable pixiu perched on a shelf in the corner of a second-hand shop. These are not flashy objects. They do not call out with color or movement. They simply exist, quietly, patiently, often unnoticed by the dozens of people who pass by. Yet if one of these figurines draws your eye, holds your attention, or seems to invite your approach, it may be acting as more than decoration or debris. In Feng Shui and other symbolic systems of energy alignment, small figurines, especially those representing sacred animals or archetypal forms, carry embedded meanings that extend far beyond their material form. They act as energetic amplifiers, focusing and projecting intention based on their symbolic history and their energetic compatibility with the person who finds them. Unlike jewelry, which tends to absorb and reflect the emotions of its former owner, figurines often operate like directional beacons. They represent qualities the seeker needs to embody or call in. A turtle, for instance, is not just a sign of slowness. It represents longevity, groundedness, and the balance between patience and protection. An elephant, often associated with Ganesh or other wisdom archetypes, can reflect strength, memory, and the removal of obstacles. A frog is tied to cleansing, fertility, or emotional release. And the pixiu, a mythical Chinese creature resembling a lion and dragon hybrid, is long believed to attract wealth, but only into spaces where that wealth will be respected and sustained through ethical intention. So when one of these items appears in your path, not as a gift, not as a purchase, but as a found object, there is value in pausing to ask not just why is this here, but why is this here now? Your emotional state at the moment of discovery is the interpretive key. If you are in a period of seeking clarity, uncertain about a business decision, or looking for stability, and you happen to find a figurine symbolizing strength, protection, or wisdom, it may be more than chance. It may be symbolic alignment. Your subconscious tuning into a larger energetic field that is reflecting your need back to you in physical form. And yet, discernment is required. Not every found figurine is meant to be taken. Some may carry dense, stuck, or directional energy that is no longer compatible with its current environment. And if you are the first person to truly notice it, you are also the one being asked to assess its readiness to re-enter a space of intention. The body, once again, becomes your guide. Pick up the object gently. How does it feel? Is there a sense of calm, curiosity, or familiarity? Or does it feel heavy, emotionally cold, or strangely destabilizing? Does your mind become quieter or more anxious in its presence? This is not intuition in the mystical sense. It is somatic awareness, the quiet intelligence of your nervous system responding to a symbolic artifact. If the feeling is negative, leave it. You can still acknowledge the message without carrying the object. But if it feels right, especially if it coincides with a life event, a transition, or a question you have been carrying without words, it may be worth accepting, cleansing, and integrating into your space as a symbolic collaborator. Cleansing is critical. Unlike fresh flowers or natural stones, figurines are often synthetic, painted, or carved. They have passed through many hands. They have witnessed homes, rituals, neglect, and sometimes reverence. Bringing that energy into your personal environment without proper clearing can result in emotional clutter rather than support. Use incense smoke, preferably sandalwood, agarwood, tramhung, or frankincense, to envelop the figurine slowly and evenly, allowing the smoke to reach into crevices and under the base. You're not just erasing the past, you're preparing the item to enter into relationship with your current energy field. Alternatively, placing the object in a window under full moonlight for several hours allows for gentle energetic purification without physical alteration. Once cleansed, the placement of the figure should be intentional. If it represents protection, place it at a gateway, near your front door, on your office desk, or in a place where boundaries are often tested. If it symbolizes prosperity, position it near areas where money flows. Your wallet drawer, your home office, or the southeast wealth corner in classical Feng Shui. If it stands for clarity or transformation, it belongs in your study, near your books, or by a mirror, where reflection and thought converge. But above all, let the placement be based on energy, not aesthetics. The item should not be hidden, but it should not be overexposed. It should feel like it belongs to that spot, not because it looks good there, but because it feels active, grounded, and harmonious with its surroundings. Let's consider a real-world reflection of this. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, once shared in a rare interview that early in his career, he kept a small carved totem on his desk, not because it was expensive or impressive, but because he found it during a solo retreat and it reminded him of endurance. He never revealed what the object was, only that it outlasted 3 office locations and countless meetings. It was never part of Amazon's brand identity, but it was part of his personal energetic architecture. This illustrates the core lesson. The power of symbolic objects lies not in how they are seen by others, but in what they reinforce in you. When an item is found, not bought, not inherited, not gifted, it speaks to readiness. You didn't seek it, it arrived. That distinction matters. But so does your willingness to engage with it mindfully, not as a lucky charm, but as a collaborator in your energetic space. Figurines do not grant wishes. They reinforce posture. They remind you of what you already have the capacity to embody, and they echo the qualities that may be needed in your life at that time. That's why the act of noticing them is often more transformative than the object itself. Section 6, old coin or historical currency. There is something unmistakably intimate about finding an old coin, a weathered piece of currency marked by age, texture, and time, resting quietly where you least expect it. Perhaps it's discovered near a public bench in the soil beside a sidewalk tree, under the leg of a cafe table, or inside the corner of a forgotten drawer in a hotel room. It's not the amount that matters. Most old coins found in everyday life have minimal material value. What carries weight is the sensation. The moment you pick it up, there is often a pause, a flicker of recognition, not because the coin is valuable in the traditional sense, but because it feels like it has history. In Feng Shui and in deeper energetic disciplines, coins symbolize transaction, flow, legacy, and embodied value. They are small, round mirrors of effort turned into exchange, representing not just the object of money, but the energy of what money is meant to represent. Work, intention, contribution, and reward. An old coin discovered during a period when you're feeling financially stagnant, emotionally devalued, or psychologically uncertain, often signifies the reawakening of dormant prosperity energy. It's a signal, not of sudden wealth, but of recalibration. These objects are not lucky charms. They are energetic reminders. The fact that they were lost, left behind, or out of circulation mirrors the very internal experience many people face when they feel financially or personally on hold. A coin that resurfaces in your path under such conditions may be quietly echoing a message. That value, though forgotten or delayed, does not disappear. It only waits to re-enter the cycle of movement. In this context, the shape of a coin is not incidental. Circular objects in Feng Shui reflect unity, continuity, and the cyclical nature of both money and life stages. Coins especially carry the energy of persistence. They move, they pass hands, they endure through decades. Unlike paper money, which wears quickly, coins last. That longevity makes them excellent vessels for residual energy, both positive and heavy. That's why the condition and context of the coin matter. A coin found in a clean, open, or light-filled environment, especially if it feels warm or neutral to the touch, is more likely to carry unspent beneficial energy. One discovered in dark, compressed, or neglected spaces may be carrying stagnation, ancestral burden, or unresolved economic narratives. Your body will usually sense the difference. Coins that evoke tension, mental fog, or subtle discomfort are not energetically neutral. They may have completed their purpose or simply not be aligned with your current vibration. In such cases, the respectful act is to acknowledge the message and let it go. Return it to the earth, the water, or a charity jar, somewhere where it can resume movement without entering your direct field. But when a coin feels right, especially if it sparks curiosity, confidence, or peace, it becomes a physical anchor for intentional presence. The most beneficial use is not to spend it, but to store it consciously. Place it in your wallet in a section that represents savings, not spending. Alternatively, keep it near your financial records, digital device, or workspace where decisions around money are made. Its function is not transactional, it's psychological. It acts as a daily touch point for your evolving relationship with value, Not value dictated by external validation, but the kind of value that accumulates over time through quiet effort and steady refinement. You can also create a simple reflection ritual with it. Once a week, hold the coin and review a small financial action you took that week. Whether it was saving a small amount, resisting an unnecessary purchase, completing a freelance task, or even forgiving yourself for a past mistake. This act ties the symbolic presence of the coin to active self-awareness, which, from an energetic standpoint, reinforces your wealth field more effectively than blind optimism or passive hoping. Historically, coins have often been used in symbolic traditions. Ancient Chinese or Qing divination uses coins to determine hexagrams. Roman emperors marked coins with intentional imagery to channel legacy and loyalty. And in Vietnamese and Chinese New Year customs, red envelopes with coins are given to transmit luck, not for spending, but for circulating energy. The message remains the same across systems. Coins carry more than monetary value. They transmit energetic codes based on intention. When you find an old coin, especially a foreign one, or one from a year that carries personal significance, it may not be about wealth at all. It may be about identity, memory, or the return to something foundational. Perhaps you find a coin from your birth year while contemplating a new job. Or perhaps the currency comes from a country you've long wanted to visit. The event may not be literal, but the symbolic alignment opens a door of thought, and sometimes that mental shift is the only real block between you and your next step. Coins also mirror the energy of small but consistent momentum. No one becomes wealthy from a single coin, but no fortune has ever been built without the power of repeated circulation. That message is not metaphor, it's behavioral. Many people experience frustration because they focus on what's missing in their financial life, instead of cultivating presence with what is currently in motion. An old coin, thoughtfully received, reverses that perspective. It reminds you that value exists in every stage of the journey, even the ones that feel paused. Its presence tells you that your efforts are part of a longer lineage, that what you're working through now has echoes in the past and effects in the future. The coin becomes a token of persistence, not perfection, of earned worth, not performative wealth, of legacy, not lottery. And that shift in mindset is the real fortune. If you feel ready, you can even assign a name or phrase to the coin: stability, expansion, right timing, and revisit that word as you hold or see it daily. This practice is not magical thinking, it's intention reinforcement. You are not asking the coin to work for you. You are using it to remember what you are working toward. Life lesson: discernment is the real luck. The truth is, life rarely speaks in grand declarations. Most of the time, it speaks in hints. A small object at your feet, a pattern that repeats until you pay attention, a subtle pull towards something that feels familiar but unexplainable. And in those moments, it's not about superstition or luck. It's about discernment, the ability to pause, feel, and respond, not to what the world expects, but to what your intuition quietly knows. You don't attract abundance by collecting objects. You attract it by becoming present enough to notice what your energy is resonating with, and courageous enough to adjust course when something points you in a new direction. That's why the things we find, whether they're coins, stones, keys, or forgotten tokens of someone else's life, are never really about the objects themselves. No, they are mirrors, not miracles. They reflect your readiness, your questions, your internal state in ways that words often cannot. And when your internal clarity begins to align, when your attention, your curiosity, and your openness meet in the same moment, the external world begins to cooperate. The things you need become visible. the steps become lighter. The next chapter becomes reachable. So the next time you find something unusual lying quietly on your path, don't just ask, "What is this?" Ask, "What is this showing me about where I am?" Not all objects are meant to be kept. Not every sign is meant to be interpreted. But the active noticing of truly seeing without rushing past or needing to explain is already a powerful shift. And if this video brought even a small sense of clarity to your day, I invite you gently, sincerely, to share it with someone who might be walking through a transition of their own. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever found something that felt meaningful, even if you didn't understand why? What did it awaken in you? And if you feel called, please subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. I'm working toward reaching 2,000 followers so I can continue creating thoughtful, grounded content that speaks to the quiet wisdom within and around us all. Your support helps more than you know and allows me to keep bringing these moments of stillness, insight, and transformation into your world. Until next time, walk slowly, stay open, and remember, sometimes the smallest thing left in your path is not a coincidence. It's a conversation waiting to happen.